Welcome everybody to another episode of our FYI 2018 webinar series from Palcus. We're very happy to be here and thanks for joining us. Today's webinar I'm actually really excited about. It's going to be quite interesting, where we're going to learn that, was Columbus a double agent for Portugal, and what was his background? Because we always hear so many different stories about Columbus. And Manuel Rosa, who is a researcher and historian who's been doing this work for many, many years, I'm sure he'll give us the exact number of years, has written a few books about Columbus and his connection to Portugal. So this one should be quite interesting. Just a little bit of housekeeping. I am going to probably put everybody on mute just to avoid any background noise, but there will be a question and answer period later on. And if you do want to type in a question, you highlight the bar on the bottom of your Zoom console, and you can click on chat and type in your question, and I can read the question to Manuel. And as I mentioned, today's presenter is Manuel Rosa. His first book was Columbus, the Untold Story. And with that, I'm going to hand over controls. Let's see. And hold on. Show video. No.
I think I can. You want me to share the screen?
Yeah, you need to make you the host, I believe. There we go. And so then you can share your screen.
All right.
To be able to.
Let's see if I'm able to do that. All right. There we go.
There we go.
Hello, everyone. All five of us. And thank you for inviting me. I'm really grateful for Angela to contacting me and asking for me to do this little webinar. I've been on Columbus' footsteps for 26 years now. I started in 1991, and let's see, I guess we'll just start right into it. I was born, for those who don't know, on the island of Pico, Madalena Pico, little church I used to go to there. Many people don't know, but the Azores was actually discovered long before 1424. They're listed in the Antilles map. And that's how the Antilles got their name, because they're opposite the islands, and the islands that are opposite, that the land is opposite of, are the Azores. So the name Antillas in Portuguese means opposite the islands, and the lands of America are called Antillas because they're beyond the islands of Portugal, meaning that when the first map of the Antilles came on and was done in 1424, the Azores had already been discovered. Anyway, my first book was O Mistério Colombo Revelado, was published in Portugal in 2006. It had 638 pages of factual evidence, documents, translation of documents, things like that. It caused Professor Serrão to send me a letter after he read it and reread it, saying he's 100% in agreement with me. Regardless, most historians in Portugal and all over the world have refused to read my research and keep insisting on the old story, and keep referring to my research as conspiracy theory. So I've published several other books, as you can see: Spain, Portugal, Poland, Lithuania. And the first edition in the United States was published in 2016, Columbus, the Untold Story. It was declared as best history book of 2016 in the Huffington Post. And it won the Independent Press Award for Best History, World History Book in 2017. So all that stuff you can see at my website, columbus-book.com. Very easy. So what have I been doing for 26 years? I've been trying to figure out who was Columbus. All the history books give him as an unschooled Genoese peasant weaver born in Genoa, Italy. They like to say that he was so stupid that when he left, he had no idea where he was going. When he got there, he had no idea where he was. And when he returned, he had no idea where he had been. And this is the Columbus that I grew up hearing about, and this ignorant sailor that most of the history books declare him to be, which is completely false and completely opposite of what the documents show. So what the historians use to support their history and all the misinformation they have been pushing on us are the books of the Faculta Colombiana, which was a huge set of books published by the city of January 1894 for the 400th anniversary of discovery. And I refer to these as the Columbus Bible. Whenever you start to push any history professor on the documentation and on the facts, they eventually will push back with these books and say all the information is in these books. So when you go to these books, you find information about the Italian Cristoforo Colombo, which was, as you can see there on the lower left, I have it highlighted. Oops. Go forward. I mistakenly hit my left hand was trying to drive while my right hand was also driving. Anyway, as you will see here on the lower left side there, it says Lanero de Genoa, meaning weaver from Genoa. And this is the Cristoforo Colombo guy that everyone says the discoverer of America was. And basically all the documents that are shown in there are the ones that are real, because there's a lot of documents that do not exist. There's just reference to documents, and there's a lot of false documents. But the ones that exist show the guy from Italy to be a weaver, along with his father and grandfather. And most importantly, they show that they were so poor that in this particular document, all these things are related to debts that the family owed. They were so poor that they could not pay 15 lira, which is the equivalent of $92 today. That's how destitute the family was. They were just, laborers, commoners, and they could not afford to pay $92. So they went to the notary and, yes, we do owe this person $92. You cannot pay it. That's what these documents are. So these documents prove beyond a doubt that the guy from Italy was a peasant weaver that was poor. But when we go to the documents in Spain, for instance, this is the Capitulación de Santa Fe, the contract made between Colón and the kings. They call him Don, as you see there. This is April 1492, so 1 year before he became famous for the discovery. He was already titled Don, which is a title of high nobility, especially in Spain, where it was very restricted. You could not use Don. There was an ordinance against you titling yourself Don if you were not one of the elite. And you can see that his name is Colón and not Columbus, which we've been calling him, or Colombo, which we call him in Portuguese. So I'm going to try to call him Colón from now on. So who was Don Cristóbal Colón? That's basically what I've been trying to answer for 26 years. And the noble Don Cristóbal Colón from Iberia is not the peasant Colombo from Genoa. It's a case of mistaken identity. And the history of Don Cristóbal Colón, these are the facts that we can document. He left secretly from Portugal to Spain in 1484. He changed his name to Cristóbal Colón. His name was not Christopher Columbus, Cristóbal Colombo, or Cristóbal Colón. This is an assumed identity in 1484. So when he goes to Spain, he assumes the name Cristóbal Colón in Spanish. He sailed in August 1492. He returned in March of 1493. He wrote his letter, what we call the Columbus letter, which actually you might have heard was stolen from the Vatican and just returned a few weeks ago to Spain, which was printed in 1493. And in that letter, the different printers printed different names and caused a lot of confusion about his identity. And that confusion has lasted until today. So the Columbus history is made up of 4 lies. The first lie is the true identity of the navigator. Nobody knows for certain who he was. He changed his name when he went to Spain. His name became Cristóbal Colón. Nobody knows what his name was prior to 1484. Nobody in the public, let's put it that way. So the guy we call Columbus and Colombo is not the discoverer. The other lie is the reason for the 1492 voyage. People say it was because he wanted to discover India. In fact, he was a secret agent for Portugal, trying to convince the Spanish that America was India to protect the real India for Portugal. I'll talk about that in a little bit. The third lie in this whole history is the Genoese fraud. Basically, the Genoese and the city of Genoa have been trying to take for themselves a guy who was not Italian and who had an assumed identity of Cristóbal Colón, and they tried to make him fit the Genoese weaver, the peasant weaver from Italy. And they've created a lot of false documentation and misrepresentations in their books, like the Recolta Colombiana. The fourth problem that we have are actually caused by writers, by historians and chroniclers who invent information and deny facts that are actually documented. This is the case of Samuel Eliot Morison, who wrote his book, Admiral of the Ocean Sea, on Columbus, who actually invents a lot of stuff and denies things that are documented, saying that, those are not true. So, and Don Cristóbal Colón, who actually was admiral, governor, and viceroy, everyone who knows viceroy, that's vice king, he was named admiral, governor, and viceroy of the New World. So he had to be very noble in his time to be able to get those titles. But he is only one of those people, of the few people who were dispersing false information. So the true identity of the navigator was kept secret from the public by the courts of Portugal, Spain, England, and France. And I'm even going to go out on a limb here and say Poland. His noble lineage in his whole life in Portugal before 1494, when he ran away to Spain and assumed a new identity, were censored on both sides of the border. Part of the censorship was done by the navigator's own request. When he assumed his new identity, he did not want the world to know his real identity. And the censorship was maintained by all around him, all who knew the reason to maintain the censorship, including his family. So here's one little proof of censorship at the Spanish court. When he got to the Spanish court, he assumed a new name. He entered Spain. He assumed the name Cristóbal Colón. But at the same time, he was housed by the Duke of Medina Celi for 2 years. So this Duke hosted Colón in his house for 2 years. And you have to presume that he knew Colón's true identity, because if someone comes into a new kingdom and renames himself, and the Duke says, "Hey, come live at my house," the Duke knows his real identity. You don't just, bring someone to your house if you don't know who they are, especially if you're a Duke. And so this is part of the censorship right here. The court of Spain was paying Colón, when he got to Spain, a few years after he was there, they started to pay him some maintenance costs. And this is one of those payments. It starts out, "I gave to," and the name is blank, and it says Portuguese. On this day, 30 gold coins. And when you look at the 30 dobles castellanas, which you see over there on the first at the first line to the right, it says dobles castellanas. The dobles were double gold coins, so they were twice as the regular castellanas. And when you add up that payment that Columbus received on this day, it adds up to 2 times the medium salary of a Portuguese worker today. So in one payment alone, he was paid by the court twice the average salary of Portugal today. And when Antonio Romeu de Armas investigated this document, he found out that the guy who actually disbursed the money to Colón wrote in his ledger, "I paid Cristóbal Colón 30 gold coins today." So this is how they're censoring his identity in Spain to try to hide who he really was. There was censorship in Portugal in the Chronicle of Rui de Pina, where he calls him by Colombo Italiano, when we know his name was not Colombo. Colombo is not even the false identity that Colón assumed for himself. It is people trying to get even further from the truth by corrupting Colón to Colombo and throw us off the track. And actually, here's a statement in one of the books that to placate certain Spanish elites, some documents were drawn up hurriedly where Colón is described as Genoese. And this was written in a book called Genealogia de la Casa de Portugal in the 1500s. So already in the 1500s, there is someone who knows the truth who is alerting us that Colón was not Genoese. This is a lie. So censorship in the family. This is the only family tree that the family had. This is housed today at the Columbus Chapel in Boalsburg, Pennsylvania. So Colón's chapel was inherited by one of his descendants who was married to General Bull. In 1908, the whole chapel was moved to Pennsylvania, Boalsburg, and all these documents are there. And this is the actual official genealogy of the first admiral of the Indies. That's what it says at the top. But you will notice that Don Cristobal Colon, which is number 1, has no parents. So here we are, we're doing the genealogy of the family, and it starts with him as if he was conceived by divine conception, okay? Because they're censoring the real identity. This is, you have to keep that in mind. Everything is done for the public never to know who Colon really was before he showed up in Spain. This is his brother Bartholomew, and this is his other brother Diego. All of them were living in Spain. This is the second Admiral Don Diego Colon, born in Portugal. He was son of Cristobal Colon and Felipe Muniz. And the interesting thing is when Bartholomew, who was living at the court of France, when Christopher went on the first voyage, Bartholomew was living at the court of France. When Christopher arrived back in Spain, he sent a mail to his brother, to hurry up and return to Spain because he was going to go on a second voyage and he wanted Bartholomew to go with him. But Bartholomew arrived late. Well, as soon as he got to Spain, the Spanish kings titled him Don. Bartholomew had done nothing. Basically, he showed up in the kingdom. He had done nothing. They gave him the title of Don, high nobility. Again, this is proof that the family was very elite in Portugal and Spain. But you can see the censorship there. They have no parents. They start with the 3 brothers, Then we go into the second lie, which is in the Columbus history, which is the reason for the first voyage. It was not to get to India. It was to give Spain a false India, to give them a false conquest so Portugal could save India for itself, which it did. And part of the lies that were involved in this, there's so many lies in this whole story from both sides. One having to do with his identity. There's lies all around that subject. And then the 1492 voyage being a false voyage of discovery. Everything that Colon did, you have to look at it through that prism of a double agent. So here it is. On Christmas 1492, he said that the ship sank, the Santa Maria sank, and he formed the Fort Navidad in Haiti, which is today the beach of Caracol in Haiti. And he told everyone the ship sank. In fact, he put the ship on shore. He shot it with a cannon so that they could not refloat the ship and follow him home. And he left behind these 39 people stranded so that he could force the Spanish court to send a second voyage. Because if he arrived back to Spain with everybody, including the 2 people he left behind in Navidad, which were the only 2 people that were gone to court with him, the comptroller of the fleet and the scribe of the fleet were 2 people from the court that were sent to keep an eye on him, he forced them to stay behind. Because if they arrived back in Spain with him, and when he told them he had conquered the city and fortified it and all that, they would have spoke up and said, no, he's lying. All the just 5 grass huts and the ship on the beach. Anyway, he left those people behind. So he made it behind. This is what he left behind. But he made the whole world believe until today that the ship sank offshore and that this is what happened. And in fact, you might have heard about 4 years ago that the treasure hunter Barry Clifford had declared that he found the Santa Maria shipwreck off the coast of Haiti. And I contested that right away and actually advised UNESCO and the Haitian government on this. And UNESCO did send some experts to look at the shipwreck, and they declared it could not be the Santa Maria. And they'll never find the Santa Maria in the sea because it was left on shore and it was burnt by the natives. When on the second voyage, when Colon returned to La Navidad, Dr. Chunka wrote that there was an anchor from the ship on the beach from the ship that the admiral had lost on the other voyage. Because the ship was burnt, the anchor survived. This is the anchor. It's actually about 7 feet, 8 feet tall. It's today in the Haitian Museum. And if the ship had sank offshore, there was no way for the natives to have dived to pick up this 2,000-pound anchor from the ocean floor. So because Columbus was acting as a double agent for the King of Portugal, this explains why, after he had already ran away to Spain in 1484, the king actually called him back to Portugal and gave him the super secret table of the solar height at the equator. So the Portuguese had sent some scientists to the equator in 1483, 1484, to measure the height of the sun at noon, so they could sail and not have to wait for the polar star at night to measure their location where they are on the sea. This secret weapon was a Portuguese secret weapon that was, you know, like atomic, like the formula to create an atomic bomb today. The King of Portugal gave that to Colón in 1485, and Colón was in Spain trying to take Spain to India, which is Portugal's enemy. So you got to think about that. The second thing that the King of Portugal did is he communicated directly with Colón while he was in Seville. In a letter from 1488, he actually declares that he's paying Colón for his service. So Colón supposedly got angry with the King of Portugal and ran away to Spain to give Spain the route to India. And yet the King of Portugal is secretly communicating with him, calling him my special friend in Seville, and telling him that he will be well paid. This letter is in my book. In 1488, when Colón comes back to Portugal, because the king in that letter asks him to come quickly because his ingenuity and wisdom are very needed at Portugal, and he should not delay his return to Portugal, he should come right away. While he was in Spain, in Portugal at 1488, the King of Portugal gave Colón all the details of the discovery of the Cape of Good Hope. So now the Portuguese know that they can get around Africa to India, and so does Colón. Colón is working in Spain trying to take the Portuguese enemy to India, and the King of Portugal gives Colón the information that says the Cape of Good Hope is discovered, you can go around Africa to India. Yet Colón kept that secret, did not go around the Cape of Good Hope, and insisted that India was to the west. And then on the return voyage, Colón actually stopped in Portugal and gave the King of Portugal the news of the discovery in March of 1493, before the Spanish even knew what was going on. During that meeting, the King of Portugal gave Colón the news that Brazil was located where it is already in 1483. And Colón lied continuously to the Spanish that America was India, and this was all intentional. It's not because he thought it was India, it's because it was his secret mission to convince the Spanish that America was India. This is how Portugal was able to trick the Spanish into signing the Treaty of Tordesillas, dividing the world in half, and giving to the Spanish what Portugal saw at the time as wilderness that had no trade and no civilization, so that Portugal could keep for itself the spice route, which is what they did. And while the Portuguese are discussing this treaty with Spain, a trader of the King of Portugal, a Portuguese guy living in Spain, actually wrote this letter to the Queen of Spain, where you can see up there it says that the Spanish court should not be tricked by these two false things, and which are all part of this evil devil, King of Portugal. And one of those false things are what they're calling Indias to the west. And they are false, and it's because of the lack of knowledge and the lack of the truth that is the Spanish did not know what was to the west, and the Portuguese did, because the Portuguese had been sailing to the west for over 200 years secretly. Anyway, to better aid Colón in this lie against Spain, the King of Portugal sent Martin of Behaim to Germany to create a false globe. And if you search today for the oldest globe in the world, you will find Martin Behaim's globe. Martin Behaim was a Templar knight, member of the Order of Christ. The King of Portugal, King John II, knighted him in 1485 and made him a member of the Order of Christ, which is the Templar Knights. And when he went to make this secret globe in Germany, was exactly as soon as Columbus set sail. And so this globe is actually falsified to put India across the Atlantic. You see the big island there is Japan. And this is intentional. People thought that Martin Behaim did not know what he was doing. In fact, he was a geographer, cosmographer, and he even modified the astrolabe for the Portuguese ship captains, making it more accurate. So he knew exactly what he was doing. To top that off, he was married to the daughter of the captain of Horta in Fayal, which means that he knew exactly where the Azores were located, and yet he put the Azores way more further to the west than they were in actuality. This globe is a false globe. It's a prop to convince Spain that Colón had really sailed to India. And to top it off, the captain of the Pinta came to Cologne holding pieces of cinnamon. And he said that a Portuguese that was sailing on his ship had gotten them from an Indian who had bundles of it, which is false. Cinnamon never grew in the New World. You see, they brought cinnamon from the Old World to convince the Spanish that they were in India. It was very well planned. This whole voyage was very well planned. The whole trick was very well planned. Colón was not working in Spain alone. You see, he had all these people working with him in Spain. All these people are tied to the court of Portugal. Okay? For instance, Genoese Berardi, who was Colón's agent in Spain, was at the same time the guy responsible to collect all the taxes for the King of Portugal in Spain. So he was working for King John II and for Colón at the same time. Let's see. Pedro Vasquez La Frontera. Oops, let me go back. Pedro Vasquez La Frontera is the guy who convinced the Pinzon brothers to join the first voyage because they were reluctant to sail that far away. They knew that it was impossible to reach India sailing west. They didn't know if there was going to be any land where they could resupply the ships and return. They didn't want to sail to their deaths. And the guy who convinced the Pinzon brothers to join the voyage was Pedro Vasquez La Frontera. Pedro Vasquez La Frontera is none other than the guy who sailed to Canada in 1452 and discovered the islands of Flores and Corvo for Portugal. He is a Portuguese criado of King Afonso V of Portugal. So all these guys, people that you see here, are all tied directly to the court of Portugal. They all were working in Spain to help Colón convince the Spanish to finance his voyage and to convince the Spanish that America was India. Even America Vespucci that you see up there on the top right came from Italy directly to Spain to get in contact with Genoese de Berardi to work for Colón. In 1495, he was already working for Colón, and he also sailed for Portugal. So this is a whole bunch of spies and secret agents all involved in a secret mission against Spain. Now we get to the root of how we prove the history was false. So when I first read that Colón, in 1991, was married to the daughter of the captain of the island of Porto Santo, Filipe Muniz, I said to myself, there's something wrong with this story. It's the first time ever, you know, I went through 5th grade in Portugal. No one ever told me Colón was married in Portugal. This most famous discoverer of the world, you know, in the world. No one taught me in school that he married a Portuguese noble lady. No one taught me in going through the American school system that Colón was married to a Portuguese noble lady. She was just ignored. And in fact, she is the key to break this whole lie wide open. So when I learned that Colón was married to the daughter of the captain of the island of Porto Santo, I said something is wrong with this story. Peasants did not marry nobles. And growing up on Pico, when I was growing up as a peasant, if I had any dreams of dating, you know, a rich girl on the island, in which there were very few, I would have got my butt whipped by the father of the rich girl. That's how things worked over there. You could not even talk to them. So in the 1400s, Portugal society was very restricted. Nobles and peasants did not intermingle. So when I found out that Colón married this lady, I started to investigate the story. That's how I got started in this. This is the only document found in Portugal that's related to Colón directly to his prior life, prior to becoming his public persona of Cristóbal Colón. This is not even about him. This is about his wife, Filipe Muniz. What this document proves is that Filipe Muniz lived at the Monastery of All Saints in Portugal, which is today the French embassy, Santos o Velho. And she was so elite, she was one of 12 allowed to live there, all expenses paid, because she belonged to the Military Order of Santiago. And because she belonged to the Military Order of Santiago, she could not marry anybody without the specific authorization of the Master of the Order of Santiago. And the Master of the Order of Santiago was King John II. So let me show you how this is all connected. Filipe Muniz was daughter of Bartholomew Perestrelo, as you see there, captain of the island of Porto Santo, who was a noble descendant of the Count Slangusco from Pavia. He was a knight of the house of Henry the Navigator. His sister-in-law raised the king's children. King Duarte's daughter were raised by Filipe's aunt. Felipe's cousin, Ana de Mendonça, was King John II's mistress, mother of Don Jorge de Lancaster, who would have been king if it wasn't for the Spanish court interfering in Portugal's politics. Then we have Pedro Correia da Cunha, who was actually captain of the island of Graciosa, and we have all these people on the lower left, which are nephews of Filipe Muniz. King John's Lord Chamberlain of the court of Portugal, the guy who ran the court for Portugal, was a nephew of Columbus. The Marquess of Montmor was a niece of Columbus. The Countess of Pernambuco was a niece of Columbus. The Countess of Brabanças was a niece of Columbus by marriage. And these are not, insignificant connections. You know, the Marquess of Montmor was married to John of Bragança, brother of the Duke of Bragança, the second most powerful house in Portugal. So before my research, none of this stuff was spelled out, was clear to anybody, who was who. They're all royal blood. In fact, the Count of Brabanças at the bottom, Lopo de Almeida, was the captain of the royal guard for the king of Portugal, for King John II. And Pedro Correia, who was Colón's brother-in-law, was one of the 25 royal bodyguards. So when Colón marries this lady in 1479, 14 years before anybody knew who he was already very elite in Portugal. He was at the top tier of society like all those other people around him were. And for him to marry that lady, King John had to authorize the marriage because he was master of the Order of Santiago, and the rule books require that all members of Santiago request permission from the master to marry. And the king would never have said to Filipe Muniz, who was, tied to all these nobles in Portugal, yes, go ahead. We know this Colombo guy just arrived on Portugal from a shipwreck. He has not a dime to his name. No land, no way to support you, but go ahead and marry him. You see how false the history is now? So the whole story of an Italian Colombo is a lie, it's false. This is a real picture of Columbus right here. This was painted in, the guy who painted this painting started painting at the court of Spain in 1505. Colón died in 1506. This was painted for the house, La Casa de Contratación de India, so the House of Commerce of India. And this is what he looked like, exactly as his son and other people described. Colón, he had reddish blonde hair when he was young that turned to white in his, around 30 years of age. He had a long eagle-like nose, and he had blue eyes. And his skin got very red from the sun. And this basically fits that. This is how he signed his name. He signed his name in secret code. And no one's been able to decipher the whole signature yet, but to the bottom, he got his name Colón from the Greek meaning member. That's what his son said. And so we have Cristoforense Colón, which in Portuguese, Cristóvão Membro, or better said, Cristo Vô Membro, Christ going member. So his name was not even a name. Cristóvão Colón, what he assumed as his identity, was not even a name. It was a mission, Christ going member. That's why he chose that name, Cristóvão Colón. So everyone says that the name Columbus is Latin for Colombo, which is not true. This is a letter from the Pope. You can see there, calls him Colón and not Columbus. The letter is all in Latin. This is another letter from the Pope, again in Latin. The name is Colón and not Columbus. 3 more letters from the Pope. 5 letters, they all call him Colón in Latin and not Columbus, which should have been the Latin of Colombo. This is the secret letter from the King of Portugal in 1488 to Colón. You see right there, Cristóvão Colón. The king calls him Colón in 1488. So you got to think about this. Colón left secretly from Portugal, running away from the king in 1484. This is what the story says. And he changed his name to Cristóvão Colón. We don't know his real name. Yet the king of Portugal writes him a secret letter to the assumed identity. You understand? This is how you show that the king of Portugal knew, Colón knew who he was writing to, because he's writing to the false identity. And this is also how you show that the Colón was working for the king of Portugal, because the king is writing to him on his assumed identity. This is his own book of privileges where he calls himself Colón. And so we have to say, if the Pope, the kings, and he himself calls him Colon, who are we to call him by something else? So these are all the translations of Columbus in Latin and Portuguese, you know, Columbus, Colombo, Pombo. It's all the same thing. That is not Colon, which was the meaning of member in Greek, which is why he chose this name. So this, by just the word alone, we can show how the history is false. But I'll show you a quick thing here. This is actually how the history gets falsified. You see, this is written in 1511 by Peter Marta. Peter Marta was the tutor of Isabel and Fernando's son, Prince Juan, who was going to be king of Spain. Peter Marta wrote this book, and he said that Christophorus Colonnas, as you see there, went to Fernando and Isabel asking for aid for this ship, for this voyage. In 1555, Richard Eden in England translated Peter Marta's book. As you can see at the top, it says this is a translation of Peter Marta's book. But Richard Eden inserted a sentence into the book that is not there, written by Peter Marta. He says, Christophorus Colonnas, otherwise called Columbus, a gentleman of Italy born in the city of Genoa. That is false. That is falsified. That is not in the original 1511 book. This is how the history has been falsified for 500 years. People have invented stuff without any factual evidence to back it up. And people who come along, if I had only read Richard Eden's book, I would have believed that Peter Marta had written in 1511 that Christopher Colonnas was also called Columbus, a gentleman from the city of Genoa. That is not in the original book. And Colonnas does not equal Columbus. The same thing is happening to me. I did a talk at Florida, University of Florida, and they recorded my talk, and then they put it online, and they called me Manuel Rosa Colon. I don't know where they got the name from. And they fixed that. But I was also on Newsmax, and they put me up as Manuel Rosa Colon. And if you go look at this interview online, you'll see that I'm still called Manuel Rosa Colon. So we have spent 500 years looking for a peasant laborer with no schooling called Cristoforo Colombo, or Pigeon, who was a weaver, when in fact we should have been looking for Don Cristobal Colon, who was highly schooled, instructed, and a navigator. And my computer just, sorry. I'll just be wrapping up quickly here. Give you some time for questions. So we should have been looking for a high noble in Portugal who was a courtesan and a navigator, but the reason we have never been looking for him was intentional. The whole identity was censored, and we've been thrown off track from the beginning because this was never supposed to have been found out. The fact that Colon was a secret agent for Portugal tricking Spain, that India was to the west, was never supposed to have been known. The fact that he was not Italian or not a peasant was never supposed to have been known. And so all the mystery and the misinformation, forgery and fraud have succeeded in doing that. This is actually supposed to be his last will, where he says he was born in Genoa. I investigated this document, and it actually was not written in 1494 like they say, but in 1598, and someone actually put a 4 over the 5. And this was presented in court by a Genoese Colombo trying to steal Columbus's inheritance in Spain. And so when it was introduced in court, the court called the document having the same weight as a blank piece of paper. But if you ask any professor of history today, how do you know Columbus was from Italy? And they say, well, he wrote that information in his last will. Okay, so they're using a forged document to support a document that was thrown out of court in 1598 for being a blank piece of paper to support that Columbus himself said he was born in Italy. Anyway, I won't get into too much of this. This is just another more forged stuff. The letter on the left and right are exact forgeries of each other, supposedly written by Columbus, which they're not. These are housed in the archives in Italy. You can see, you pick any spot on the letter, you'll see that there's an exact copy as if it was a Xerox copy, except for the one on the left has a couple of holes in it, which means it's the original that the other one was copied from. And let's see, that's also forgery. So we went through this. Let me get out of here. Oh, what about those books that the City of Genoa printed out? Well, actually, a Spanish historian who worked on it, once he saw the whole books, he said they should have left out the false documents as being worthless. This was in 1935 that it was said. The DNA tests that were done by the University of Granada showed that we got 477 negative Colombos. They have no ties to the Colon family. The Colon guy was so schooled that he used 90 different sources for his book of prophecies that he wrote. And so what we have is a guy whose name was Cristobal Colon, which was not his real name. He was high noble. He was Portuguese born. The voyage was to fool Spain. He was a Portuguese spy, and he did not look anything like the guy that you guys are used to seeing. And so for more of that information, you can pick up my book. There's lots of secrets in this that I reveal, like the painting of him. Here's one secret that I reveal in the book. He's painted with 3 pomegranates cut open in triangle form, which is actually the Freemason 1st and 2nd degree. And as you all might know, because you probably have Portuguese ancestry, the Templar Knights were never extinguished. They became the Portuguese Order of Christ. And Henry the Navigator, from 1420 until 1460, was the Templar Master of the world. He was Master of the Order of Christ. And here is the last clue that I found to Colon's identity. And this is why my new book is called The Columbus Mystery Solved. And so you will see up there, number A is King Ladislav III of Poland. Number B is his father. And they all descend from the bottom from a Colonna family from Rome. So the censorship from 84 to when he got to Spain until 1506 when he died, and then the invention from after he died until today succeeded in keeping the mystery hidden in Portugal until now. But if you want to know the truth, that Columbus, the untold story. Thank you.
Holy cow. That's
a lot of information, I know.
Yeah, pretty incredible work. So we do have a question, and that is, why didn't the King of Portugal just hire Colon to sail for the Portuguese in the first place? Why all the subterfuge? Why all the...
Well, sail for the Portuguese to where?
Anywhere.
Well, he did sail. Before 1484, he did sail for the King of Portugal. He was one of the King of Portugal's pilots. So I don't understand the question. Your question is, why did he sail to the west looking for India instead of going to the real India? Right? Is that what you're asking?
Well, it wasn't my question. It wasn't my question. It was Marie's question, so I'll let her clarify what she meant. But I guess it's why the secret identity?
Well, the secret identity is to hide him. The secret identity is separate from the secret mission. And so if Colon had stayed in Portugal his whole life, you would never have heard of him, okay? He would have gone on he would have died with his real name, and his children, maybe eventually we would have found out, who his father was. But because he came onto the world stage, he could not do it with his real name. He would have betrayed his father. His father was the King of Poland who ran away from battle against the Muslims in 1444 in Varna, and went to hide in Madeira, which is where Columbus was born. So when he assumed his new identity, he was trying to hide his father. He did not want his father identity to be known, because then everybody would know that the king was still alive, the Polish king was still alive. So the secret identity is separate from the secret mission. He had to assume the new identity because he was hiding his father. He was sent to Spain to trick the Spanish to aid Portugal, because the Queen of Spain had tried to kill the King of Portugal, interesting enough, using 2 of Columbus's nephews, that guy, Pena and the Marquis of Montmort, were trying to aid Spain to kill the King of Portugal in 1483, 1484. So Queen Isabel could nullify her treaty of Alcáceres that prevented the Spanish ships from sailing south of the Canaries. And so what Portugal wanted to do was to write a new treaty that forbade the Spanish to sail to India. Even though Portugal had already discovered the Cape of Good Hope and they could have sailed to India right after 1488, they never did until the Treaty of Tordesillas was signed. That's because they needed to tie Spain's hands. They could not discover the sea route to India and then have the Spanish follow them and to steal it from them. So Columbus' mission was to convince Spain America was India. So Spain would want to protect this India for themselves and sign a new treaty, which they did, the Treaty of Tordesillas, which forbade the Spanish to sail to India. Once that treaty was signed is when the King of Portugal gave orders to sail to India. So that was the diversion of Columbus, was a diversion mission to force a new treaty. Other questions?
And so as far as his heritage, so he is Polish heritage, but born in Portugal because his father was hiding in Madeira.
Exactly. His father was known in Portugal as Henrique Calamão. He was given the lands of Madalena do Mar in Madeira. He was married to a lady known as Signorinha Anish, and we don't know who she was. And so now I'm formulating the theory that she was actually an illegitimate daughter of Prince Henry the Navigator, because Prince Henry, there was rumors that he had an illegitimate daughter. And it makes perfect sense that the King of Poland, took on the name Henrique Calamão, which is kind of Henrique, in honor of his father-in-law, Infante Henrique. So anyway, that's a theory I'm formulating that I'm hoping to do DNA tests and prove. But he went into hiding, was living in Madeira. He always denied he was the King of Poland. And even when the monks that were sent to call him back recognized him as the King of Poland, he denied he was the King of Poland. And so when Colón, whose real name would be Sigismundo Henriques, when he went to Spain, if he went as Sigismundo Henriques, people would say, hey, aren't you son? Isn't your father the King of Poland? You see, by changing his name to Cristóbal Colón, he completely disconnected from his father and protected his father from all this harassment.
Right. So we do have some idea of what his real name would be.
In my theory, his name was Sigismundo Henriques. And this is also why he put a large monogram S at the bottom on his letters to the right, the initial of Sigismundo.
Interesting.
So I have all kinds of things that point to that. I have my book is full of evidence and documents that prove my theory. All I need now is just DNA to confirm it.
And what has I'm curious what Portugal today has said about it. The government, are they do they embrace
nobody knows
this theory?
my theory. Nobody knows my theory. They don't read my books. So I can tell you that everyone who's read the book has been convinced by it, and they ask the same question: why aren't the historians and the academics looking at this and researching and rewriting the history books? Well, the reason is that they believe that the documents printed by the city of Genoa are authentic, and who am I to question authentic documentation? And so, if I had a PhD in history, if I had gone through that instead of, doing all this work myself without having a PhD in history, I would be taken more serious. But everything I say is documented. Is documented. I have 500 footnotes in my book. Anyone can go and look at the original documents and books and see exactly where the information can be found. Like the guy who wrote that, because the elites in Spain were getting upset about all the titles that Colón was getting, and so they went and wrote some documentation calling him Genoese. That's documented. That's written in the 1500s. So
there are no scholars who support your theories and conclusions? Or
no,
do you
there
have
are.
some people?
Yeah, I have scholars who support my theory. I have lots of them, but not the major ones in the Columbus, in the Columbus field, like the Phillips, William Phillips, in the University of Minnesota, and some other people who are the ones that they always turn to, and and those guys are seen as the experts. And so, other professors, like I have, 5 professors in Portugal that have written, I've written about my work, they've mentioned my work in saying that, my work makes the history very doubtful, the current history very doubtful. And some that even said that, the history is false, period. I got a guy that, but they're not in the field of Columbus. And so they're not seen as the authority on that to be able to support my theory in that sense. And the other problem is people are not reading my books. So this edition right here is a very limited edition. It was only 2,000 books printed. And so, until this gets into the mass market, people are not going to know any of these facts. So they will take the ideas of professors who write, well, this guy doesn't base himself for anything, he's just inventing this stuff. In fact, if you take that without reading my book, then you're going to accept that I have nothing to show. I don't have a document from the Monastery of All Saints proving that Columbus' wife was a commendadora of All Saints, which means she lived off of the rents from that property. And until you see the stuff I present, if you don't read and see what I present, if you just accept what these supposedly know-it-all professors are saying, then you're going to think my research is unworthy of reading. And that's really that's the problem that I have with all this, is that they do not read the research, and then they tell people not to read it, which is very bad. They should say that what they should do is read the research and then tell me where I'm wrong. Right.
So, as everybody knows, Columbus's reputation has come under fire the last few years, and he's been said to have been a pretty terrible person as far as when he arrived in the New World.
Yes.
Any of your research reflect that? And I'm curious as to what the experts, the guy in Minnesota, what they have to say about that.
Well, here's the thing. I focus mainly on trying to research the identity and the reason for and why nothing made any sense. As far as the atrocities that were committed, I could reply with didn't Alexander the Great and didn't George Washington and whatever, didn't they commit atrocities? Yes, they did. But Columbus is very overblown. What Columbus did is overblown. Because people did not realize a couple of things. One is he came here in 1492. He took back about 12. He captured about 12 Indians or 15 Indians to take back and show, to the kings what these people looked like. So he kidnapped 15 or so natives. When he returned, he tried to build a new colony, Isabella and Santo Domingo. And he tried to make these natives his subjects, because by the law, by the contract he had with the kings of Spain, this was his territory. He was governor over, and he had to rule them. He wasn't here to kill them. But what happened is that they revolted, and because they revolted, Columbus only had 1,500 men with him. So there's 100,000, 150,000 natives in Haiti. He had 1,500 men. So they were, greatly outnumbered, and half of those men actually revolted against Columbus and formed their own army against Columbus. So they were fighting all the time. So, but let's backtrack a little bit. Columbus ruled the New World from 1493 to 1500. He was arrested in 1500 when Vasco da Gama returned from the Real India. The Spanish sent Bobadilla to Haiti to arrest Columbus, and he never ruled over the New World. So from 1493, end of 1493 to 1500, that's 7 years. Well, let's say 1494, really, because he got there in October. So 1494 to 1500, 6 years. That's the only time. That's the only time Columbus ruled over the New World. 6 years. And out of two of those years, he actually was back in Spain. His brothers were ruling. So he it was 6 years. Am I going to say that he didn't kill any natives or rape any girls or try to enslave them? Yeah. In one of the wars he had with the natives, he captured about 400 of them, and he sent them back in 2 ships, I think, to be sold as slaves. When they got to Spain, the queen said, "No, these are not slaves; these are our subjects. So you cannot use them as slaves. They're our subjects, you have to treat them like that. And so what happened afterwards was the real bad stuff that came along, was the people who succeeded him, who herded the natives into their huts and set the huts on fire. That is completely different from what, Colon was trying to do. So, after all, like I said, what conqueror of any land is not going to, it's been happening from the beginning of time. So if you want to single out Colon for trying to conquer some land, we could single out, invaders from the beginning of time.
Right. We have one last question, just a few minutes left. How does your research support or differ from that of Dr. Manuel Luciano da Silva?
Very different. Very different, completely different. So my support is based on documentation, documents, things. As a matter of fact, Luciano da Silva, when he wrote his book, he used some information that he had gotten from me through emails, because I had no idea he was writing a book, and I was communicating with him. He didn't know I was writing a book, and I was, communicating with him about some of the misinformed things he was writing about. And so anyway, he ended up using some information that I had given him in his book, which was neither here nor there. So Luciano da Silva wrote a book on imagining what the truth might have been, but without one single ounce of proof, and misinterpreting lots of things. Like when he sees Christophe, when he sees the name in the Pope's letter, like I showed you, where it's got Christophe Colon, and when he sees a thing over the O, which he misinterprets as being a tilde, when in fact it's a contraction mark, things like that. So, he accepted Colon was Portuguese, but he has no, there's no factual evidence backing up any of the theories, any of the information he presents, in the sense that he thinks that Salvador Zarco never existed in any documentation in Portugal. Besides, his son said, Colon's son said that his father descended from a Roman general, Colon, and that Roman general actually is Gaius Mario, married to Julius Caesar, which I point all this stuff out, which is the trunk of the house of Colonna in Italy. So, and as you saw the last image I showed you here in my book, the king of Poland descends from the same guy from Rome. So everything that I put together, chapter 17 of my book is the only chapter that deals with my theory of who Colon was. All the other chapters deal with pointing out the evidence and showing, what the evidence is and what things were going on. So when I talk in my 17th chapter about who Colon was, I am presenting all the evidence that comes together to support my theory. Colon lived in Madeira. Well, that's where the king was hiding. Colon was very elite in Portugal, high noble, well, he's the son of a king. Colon was related to the kings of Constantinople. Well, so was the king of Poland. So, Colon descended from the kings of Jerusalem. So did the kings of Poland. So everything I'm putting together is evidence that supports, the theory. Well, let's put it this way. I didn't formulate the theory and then go look for evidence. I look at the evidence and I said, hey, this is the answer. Why? Because even in this chapel I told you in Boalsburg, Pennsylvania, where Colon family was their private chapel, they put an eagle at the center of their coat of arms, hidden inside their private chapel, and the eagle is the arms of the kings of Poland. So everything points to that, to me being correct. So now I'm trying to get access to the bones in Wawel Cathedral in Poland, who would be Colon's grandfather, to see if I can prove that Colon was really, descended from the kings of Poland.
Fascinating. Well, we have reached our time.
Okay.
So thank you very much.
I enjoyed it. I would say that you guys should invite me to do more talks around Virginia and some other places, but in person,
Yeah, no, we could certainly consider that. Can you hand over control back to me for the video, and I'll wrap it up?
Let me see if I can to close this. How do I do that?
You go down to the participants, and then you hover over my name, and then it should give you an option to make me the host.
Participants, mute more. Make host, got it. Okay, Miss Angela.
Great. Let me
There you
just
go.
share this. Okay.
So it was a lot of information, you know, but I had to talk fast because I had a little time, you know.
Right.
But
no, so I just wanted to. I'll just wrap it up here.
Okay.
It's really fascinating stuff, and you know, you wonder if if the truth will ever be fully proven and accepted, you know, into the new history books. But
well, my
we
stuff is
appreciate
based
your
on
time.
documentation, so it's based on documentation. They would have to, whereas the current history of Columbus is based on hearsay, so it's very different, you know.
Right, right. Well, we will be posting this webinar on our website and on our YouTube channel, and we'll be sharing it with our network. So hopefully more people will find out about it, which means hopefully
Okay.
more people will read your book. And we also have PDFs of all our presentations posted to our website for anyone who wants to take a look.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, if you have questions for Manuel or us, you can contact him directly through his website, which he posted there. And you can contact us through our website, palcus.org. If anyone is interested in sponsoring a webinar, these are free to the community and the presenting organization. We do this as a service to our community, and we need, you know, support to continue to make it free. We do get thousands of views on our videos, and so it's a great way to reach the Portuguese community in general. If you have any interest, please contact us at palcus@palcus.org. And with that, I just wanted to thank everybody for attending, and thank you again, Manuel. It was really, really fascinating. And I don't have your book, but I think I'm going to go get it now. And
don't buy it on Amazon. It's like $50 on Amazon. I only sell it for $25 on my page, my website.
Okay, then hopefully more people will you know, read your book and learn the truth. And with that, we'll say thanks for attending, and have a good day, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.